Well, hello, it's good to see you. My name's Maurice Barratt and this is the 6-day online Bible school. We're going through this module, module 6, and it's book 6 in the series that I've written. It's called Choices for a Disciple. In a few weeks' studies, we're going to get on to the conclusion of the sermon, the choices. But we're into Matthew 7. I'm going to read it. The book can be obtained from the website www.barrattministries.org.uk as a paperback or as a PDF, and you can get it on Amazon as a Kindle download. Let me read the passage. We've had 3 weeks, this is the last week, and it's all on prayer. So it's Matthew chapter 7 verse 7. Jesus says this: "Ask, and it shall be given you. Seek, and you shall find. Knock, and it shall be opened unto you. For everyone that asketh receiveth, and everyone that seeketh findeth, and everyone that knocketh it shall be opened. What man is there of you who, if his son asks for bread, would he give him a stone? Certainly not. Or if he asks for a fish, will he give him a serpent? No way. If you then, being imperfect, know how to give good gifts unto your children, how much more shall your Father which is in heaven give good things to those that ask him?" So we saw there was a progression. Asking is the simplest form of petition. You ask for your needs or your greeds. It's just spontaneous often. But seeking takes effort. You can't seek sitting. It takes movement. It takes searching. You don't seek for what you have. And then the last study, knock and it shall be opened. This is intercession. This is the highest form of prayer. You don't knock at an open door, you go through. So this is knocking to a closed door. This is when God says no and you push through. And we looked at the examples of Moses and different people. But there's another verse. And it must be a conclusion because it says, therefore, it's still in the paragraph, therefore all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do you even so to them, for this is the law and the prophets. Why does it say it's the law and the prophets? We're talking about prayer. It seems like there's another condition. That if I won't fulfill this, I won't get my prayers answered. Because this is just the law and the prophets. Well, we'll have a look at it. You know, this maxim, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. The world know that. They use it in sales now. Treat people as you'd like to be treated. Don't treat them, don't push them. If you would like a salesman to push you and bully you into a sale, don't do it to them. Techniques change over the years, but they've used that in sales for a while now. Do unto others as they do unto you. They don't even know it's from the Bible, many of them, and they don't understand it. And it's in conclusion, because you know how to give good gifts to your children, make sure that you follow this rule. Let me read from Psalm 15. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Question. Lord, who shall abide in your tabernacle? Who shall dwell in thy holy hill? When you come again, and New Jerusalem comes down from heaven, who'll dwell, who'll abide, who'll stay in your tabernacle? Who'll dwell with you? And this is the answer. He that walketh uprightly and worketh righteousness, and speaketh truth in his heart. Verse 3, he that backbiteth not with his tongue, nor doeth evil to his neighbour. Don't forget we're looking at treat your neighbour as yourself. Love your neighbour as yourself. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Nor taketh up a reproach against his neighbour, in whose eyes a vile person is condemned. But he honoureth them that fear the Lord. He that sweareth to his own hurt and changeth not. He that putteth not out his money to usury, nor taketh reward against the innocent. This is all treating your neighbour rightly. He that doeth these things shall never be moved. All about loving your neighbour, treating your neighbour how you'd like to be treated yourself. I've got quite a few scriptures tonight because I want the Bible to interpret itself. So I'm going to read from Romans 15 now. Romans 15, verse 1 to 3. You'll be amazed how much the epistles talk about treating our neighbour as we'd like to be treated ourselves, loving our neighbour as ourselves. We then that are strong ought to bear the infirmities of the weak and not to please ourselves. We've got a silly doctrine going round now that we have to love ourselves. But it says here, we are not to please ourselves. Let every one of us please his neighbour for good to edification. When you love yourself, you need pleasing. What you want, I love myself. You become the idol. For even Christ pleased not himself. Jesus denied himself, but as it is written, the reproaches of them that reproached thee fell on me. Let everyone please his neighbour for good to edification. So all through the Bible, I'm going to bring more scriptures. It is telling us that we should love our neighbour as ourselves, that we should do unto others as we want them to do to you. Of course, the opposite of this is covetousness, serving self. Loving self is covetousness. I don't want to go into it, but the very first sin was Eve in the Garden of Eden. And she pleased herself. In other words, she loved herself more than God. That was the test in the Garden of Eden. It was nothing to do with eating apples. If God had said, don't touch that stone over there, that would have been sin. It was whether you would obey God or please yourself. That was the test. So God put something there, and it was very attractive, and it would make her more like God. It would make her wise. She'd know good and evil like God did. The sin wasn't knowing good and evil. There's nothing wrong with knowing good and evil if God knows it. It was obedience or disobedience. That was the choice. And she chose to do what she wanted. She loved herself more than she loved God. That's the test. Do you love yourself more than your neighbour? Do you love yourself more than God? Well, it's a good test. You only know you love God if you love your neighbour. You love God as much as you love your neighbour. And the Good Samaritan says it's our enemy, so it's a very strong test. Covetousness, she wanted what she wanted. She coveted her own independence. And she pleased herself. She loved herself more than God and what she wanted. But Jesus said, this is the law and the prophets. Whether he's saying it, come on, love you, it's only what's in the whole of the law and the prophets. And he could be saying it like that. So what do you expect? This is the law and the prophets. Well, it's full of scriptures. The law and the prophets are full of these type of scriptures. So if it was that way he was saying it, when he was educating them or saying, come on, you know that, let's look at some of the scriptures. Matthew 22. I'm going to look at the Old Testament in a minute, but we're looking at the law and the prophets. Matthew 22, verse 35. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked Jesus a question, tempting him and saying, Master, which is the great commandment in the law, the most important one? Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment. This is the most important commandment. Love God with your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength. And Jesus said, I'll throw the second one in, although we haven't asked for it. And the second is like it. It's very similar. Thou shalt love thy neighbour as thyself. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So Jesus is reiterating his statement from the Sermon on the Mount. All right, let's look at the law. The statement, love your neighbour as yourself, is not New Testament. It's not from Jesus. It's actually, he's quoting the Old Testament. He's quoting Leviticus chapter 19. Verse 17 says, Thou shalt not hate thy brother in thine heart. You've got to love your brother. Don't hate him in your heart. Thou shalt in any wise rebuke thy neighbour, not suffer sin upon him. You can rebuke him if he's wrong, but you mustn't hate him. Thou shalt not avenge, not get revenge, nor bear any grudge against the children of your people, but you shall love your neighbour as thyself. Love your neighbour as much as you love yourself. I am the Lord. Let's look at the 10 Commandments. The first 4 are about loving God, and the last 6 are about loving your neighbour. Love God with your heart, your soul, your mind, your strength, and your neighbour yourself. That's all the law and the prophets. There's no greater commandments. They're all summed up in 2 statements. Let me just read it. Exodus 20, the 10 Commandments. And if we read from verse 12, honour your father and your mother. Thou shalt not kill, 13. Thou shalt not commit adultery. Thou shalt not steal. Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbour, etc. So they're all about your neighbour, all about doing to others as you'd want them to do unto you. I don't want you to steal from me. I don't want you to steal my wife and commit adultery. I don't want you to kill me. So really, it's doing to your neighbour as you would have them do to you. This is so important. How can you expect God to answer your prayers when you don't keep the basic commandments of loving God and loving your neighbour? Well, we should look at one of the prophets, shouldn't we? When Israel backslid, and it was often, I've just been reading this morning in my private devotions, in Deuteronomy, how Moses prophesied before they went in the promised land that they would backslide, that they would go away from God. And so the prophets came and told them many times. This is Zechariah. If you're not sure where Zechariah is, you go to Matthew and turn back. It's right near the end of the Old Testament. This is Zechariah chapter 7. And Zechariah is telling them off because they've not obeyed God. Verse 9, thus speaketh the Lord of hosts, saying, execute true judgment, and show mercy and compassion every man to his brother. I'd like you to show compassion and mercy to me, so whatever I've received, I'm indebted to administer. I'll say that again, it's a good maxim. Whatever I've received from God, I'm obligated, indebted to administer to you. If I receive mercy, I must give mercy. If I receive grace, I must show grace. If I receive forgiveness, I must show forgiveness. Show mercy and compassion every man to his brother, and oppress not the widow, nor the fatherless, the strangers, nor the poor. You see, it's easy to oppress those that you can. When you're in a higher position, it's easy to neglect them. And let none of you imagine evil against his brother in your hearts. Well, let's read what Paul says. We're not in the old covenant now, we're not under it, we're under the new covenant. The old covenant has passed away. We don't have to keep the law of Moses. It's written on our hearts, the model law of God, and the ceremonies are done away with. Romans chapter 13. Verse 7. Render therefore to all their dues, tribute to whom tribute is due, custom to whom custom, fear to whom fear, honour to whom honour. Owe no man anything, but to love one another. For he that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. This is the law and the prophets. Jesus is saying again what he'd said earlier. Chapter 5 and 6 say the same things, but he's repeating it. This must be very important because it comes across a few times in the Sermon on the Mount. He that loveth another hath fulfilled the law. Remember, Jesus said, I've not come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. And you fulfill it by love. We've seen that in the second module. For this, thou shalt not commit adultery against your neighbour. Thou shalt not kill against your neighbour. Thou shalt not steal against the neighbour, etc. Thou shalt not bear false witness. Thou shalt not covet. And if there's any other commandment, it's briefly comprehended in this saying, namely, you must love your neighbour as yourself. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Love worketh no ill to his neighbour. Therefore, love is a fulfilling of the law. That's the definition of love. Love is fulfilling the law. If you love God, you'll obey him. And Galatians chapter 5. Verse 13. For brethren, you've been called unto liberty, but don't use liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. Do unto others as you have them do unto you. For all the law is fulfilled in one statement, even this, you shall love your neighbour as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, take heed you not consume one of another. How much do we love ourselves? The New Age doctrine that's going around that you must love yourself before you can love others is not biblical. The whole of the rest of the Bible fights against that. That's one statement that people have used, and it's New Age. It's self has crept into the church. We're in an age of self-love, self-satisfaction. I'll run my life, and it's crept into the church. And so we have this hideous saying, you've got to love yourself or you can't love others. Love yourself first. That's not true. You love God first, you love others second, and you love yourself last. In fact, you don't love yourself at all. You deny self. You make yourself of no reputation. It's a given that we love ourselves when Jesus says, love your neighbour as you love yourself. It's a given that we do love ourselves because the Bible tells us so and tells us to deny ourselves. Ephesians. Paul's talking about marriage and Christ and the church. But he says this, and it's verse 28, chapter 5 of Ephesians, verse 28. So men ought to love their wives as their own bodies. Love your wife as you love yourself. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. So you could think, well, if I don't love myself, how can I love my wife? That would be the same twisted logic, except the next verse contradicts that. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh. What it's saying is you do love yourself, so love your neighbour as much as you love yourself, which is very much. But nourish and cherish it, even as the Lord the church. Love your neighbour as yourself. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. How would you like your neighbour to treat you? How would you like other Christians to treat you? Well, I'd like them to be truthful. I'd like them to be honest with me and tell me. I wouldn't like them to tell me not a white lie, but make excuses. I'd like them to tell me the truth. I'd like them to be kind to me. I'd like them to be generous. I like generous people. My problem is that I find it hard to be generous myself, but I love generous people. See, whatever we like, we have to administer. I love people who are generous. It blesses me. So I must be that same person, generous. Reliable. I like reliable people. I don't like people who let me down. I don't think it's godly. When people say, I'll meet you at a certain time, I expect them to be there on time. If they book me to minister at a church, I don't expect them to cancel it and say, oh, we've changed our mind or we've double booked. I expect them to have integrity. So I must be full of integrity. However you'd think, how would you like people to treat you? If you think about it, you'll find that you fail very much. Because we don't treat people the same as we like to be treated. We don't love our neighbour as much as ourselves. And this is a challenge. And often we make excuses. Let me read Proverbs. It's easy to make excuses. Proverbs 14. Says this. He that despiseth his neighbour sinneth. Wow. He that despiseth his neighbour sinneth. But he that hath mercy on the poor, happy is he. You know, it's easier to despise the poor. Easier to despise somebody who's sat at the roadside begging. Well, he should get a job. It's his own fault. maybe it is his own fault. Maybe he should get a job. But if you were in his shoes, how would you feel? How would you like to be treated? Would you like to be despised? Or would you like somebody to have compassion and try and help you get a job? Not rubbish you because you haven't got one. What about helping them? What about taking them home and getting on the internet and trying to find them a job? I'd love that if I was in his shoes. You know, we're very lopsided, we're very one-sided the way we treat people. Driving the car. I'm amazed how people criticise. Look at that fool, look at that idiot. I wouldn't like people to say that about me. I don't feel I'm an idiot. I make mistakes on the road like we all do. I'm not perfect. But I wouldn't like people to rubbish me because I made a mistake. But we do it all the time. We have to be careful, you know. This is a challenging study if you'll take it to heart, because you don't treat your neighbour as yourself, and neither do I. I'm challenged as I'm giving this now. We need to change. We need to take these things seriously, and it'll take time, but slowly adjust. Ephesians 4:25. Wherefore, putting away lying, speak every man truth with his neighbour, who remembers one of another. That implies that Paul knew that Christians were lying to each other. Put away lying. Deceiving. Lies doesn't mean that you say black is white or white is black. You can lie in many ways. You can lie by your life. You can do deceitful things. That's a lie. A lie is something you do often, not what you say. Put away lying. Speak every man truth with his neighbour. We're members one of another. And James, chapter 2. James calls this the royal law, regal, royal law. James chapter 2 and verse 8. If you fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, this is the kingly way, this is the way that puts you above the common people. You shall love your neighbour as yourself, you'll do well. If you fulfill this royal law, love your neighbour as yourself, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, you do well. But if you have respect to persons, you commit sin. Did you know that? If you don't respect persons, you commit sin, and are convinced of the law as transgressors. For whosoever shall keep the whole law, yet offend in one point, is guilty of all. Strong stuff from James. James is a very strong epistle, isn't it? Proverbs 14. You know, it's easy to plan things in your heart against your neighbour, how you can get revenge, how you can hurt them, how you can get the better of them. That's not loving your neighbour as yourself. That's not doing to others as you'd have them do to you. Often we plan how to get the better of Christians. It's despicable, and yet it's happening all the time in churches. Proverbs 14:21. He that despiseth his neighbour sinneth, but he that hath mercy on the poor, happy is he. Jeremiah 34. Verse 12. Therefore the word of the Lord came to Jeremiah from the Lord, saying, Thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, I made a covenant with your fathers in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of the hand of bondmen, saying, At the end of 7 years let every man go every man his brother, a Hebrew, let them go, which have been sold unto thee. And when he has served thee 6 years, thou shalt let him go free from thee. But your fathers hearken not unto me, neither incline their ear. And you were now turned and had done right in my sight, in proclaiming liberty every man to his neighbour. And he had made a covenant before me in the house which is called by my name. But you turned and polluted, blasphemed, didn't hallow my name, and caused every man his servant and every man his handmaid, whom you set at liberty at their pleasure, to return, and brought them into subjection, to be unto you for servants and handmaids. How many pastors control the congregations? Religion's about control. I hate religion Whatever religion, even Christianity has a religion, we're supposed to have a relationship. Religion's about control. So how many ministers control the congregations? They feel they're obliged to do certain things, not because they want to. They feel they can't let the pastor down. It controls them. So I'll ask you pastors who are listening, would you like to be controlled? Put under obligation when you shouldn't be? We don't like to be controlled. We like to have a free will. Religion controls you, conforms you. Jesus came to set us free. We can make our own mind up. And these were being controlled. They let them free after 7 years, and then they got them back again and put them under control. Therefore, thus saith the Lord, ye have not hearkened unto me in proclaiming liberty, every man to his brother, and every man to his neighbour. And so he goes on, an indictment. We're supposed to free people, not control them, not bind them, not put them under obligation. They're serving God, not the church. They're not serving the pastor. We come under authority. If you're in a church, you should come under that authority. But it mustn't be abused. It mustn't be abused. And if you're a boss at work, don't take advantage of your position and control people. Give them the freedom. Well, do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Love your neighbour as yourself. Who's your neighbour? Well, I'm going to read from Luke. This is a challenge. Luke 14. Verse 12. This is Jesus' instruction because people wanted the best seat at the feast. They love themselves, so they wanted the best seat. If you love yourself, you want your recognition, don't you? You don't want to be despised, you want to be exalted. And they were seeking the best seat. Jesus said, verse 10, chapter 14 of Luke, when you're bidden, go and sit in the lowest room. Then said he also to him that bade him, this is verse 12, when you make a dinner or a supper, call not your friends, nor your brothers, nor your kinsmen, your relations, nor your rich neighbours, lest they bid thee again and a recompense be made. But when you make a feast, call the poor, the blind, the maimed, and thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee, for thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. If you want your praise of God at the resurrection, you have to do this. If you want the praise of men, tit for tat. People invite you for a nice meal and you say, right, next time it's at our house. There's nothing wrong with that. To reciprocate the favour, that's great. But God can't reward you for doing that. The world do that. Scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. So Jesus says, when you have a feast, not every time, invite the poor, the lonely, those who have got no fellowship, those who have got no company. And you'll get it because they can never ask you. Because they can't afford it, they haven't got the house, whatever. And you'll be rewarded at the resurrection of the just. Do you want your rewards now, your blessing now, or do you want them when Jesus comes? I've already made up my mind. I'm not living for this life. I want my blessings when Jesus comes. I want my reward and my wealth and my status when Jesus comes. I remember preaching this years ago, this very sermon, and it was near Christmas, and I felt challenged, and I said to my wife, let's invite somebody for the Christmas dinner. And so we invited some people who were new Christians. They'd been drug addicts. They didn't really have any possessions. They didn't have much money for Christmas dinner. They probably wouldn't have one. And we invited them. And it spoilt our Christmas because Christmas time to us was family. So we all sat round opening our presents and greetings. Well, of course, we didn't know them. And of course, we bought presents for them. But it was sort of an embarrassing time because it was different. And when I say it spoilt it, I'm glad I did it. But it was painful because, we coveted that time with our family at Christmas and we gave it up. We have to practice what we preach, don't we? It's very difficult to actually put into practice what Jesus said. Everyone believes what Jesus said and will use that as a principle, but will you actually do it? There's an example of a meal to invite the poor, the blind, the naked. I wonder how many people invite those in the church who are poor on the dole. Not very well liked. Who invites those for a meal? We usually invite our friends. The pastor should be the first one. He should set the example. I found that ministers are often the worst. Often when I'm visiting and they put me up in a hotel because it's too much trouble and they've got spare rooms in the house. But we can be very selfish in the ministry. The Good Samaritan, I don't suppose I have to read that to you. The man said, well, who's my neighbour? Jesus said, love your neighbour as yourself. And he questioned, he said, well, who's my neighbour? And Jesus showed him it was the one that he despised, his enemy. And surely you know the story of the Good Samaritan. I don't have to go through it. What about the rich young ruler? If you want to look at the Good Samaritan, it's Luke chapter 10, verse 25 to 37. And the rich young ruler, it's a very, very common story, Matthew 19 to 22. And the rich young ruler wanted to know the way of salvation. And Jesus told him, he said, keep the law. Which ones? And he told him. And he said, well, I've kept all those from my youth. I must have eternal life then. Because that's what he said. What must I do to have eternal life? Jesus told him, he says, well, I qualify. I've got eternal life. What do I lack? Is there anything more? Oh my. You know, when you ask God, is there anything more than being saved and getting a ticket to heaven? You'll get a shot. You press button A. And you don't get your money back. You get hit on the nose with the word of God. He said, yes, if you want to be perfect, that's not sinless, mature, like your Father in heaven, sell what you've got, give to the poor, and you'll have treasures in heaven. And he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it. He couldn't love his neighbour himself. He who loved himself, and he loved his riches, and he couldn't give them away. I'm amazed. He never said, well, God, Jesus, that's tough. Sell everything I've got. I'm very rich, you know that. I'll sell 50% and give to the poor. I think Jesus would have said, that's a start, that's great. If he'd have said 10%, I can't do that, Lord, but I'll 10% of £1 million, a lot of money if he was a very wealthy man. That would have fed a lot of people. But he didn't give a shekel, he didn't give anything. And he went away sorrowful. He loved himself so much and he despised his neighbour so much. Because the more you love yourself, the more you despise people. So how ridiculous, you've got to love yourself before you love others. When you love others, you despise yourself. The rich young ruler loved himself so much, he wanted to be rich and status and everything. He loved it so much, and he couldn't love his neighbour as much as he loved himself, or else he'd have given his money away. You prove who you love by what you do. Shall I say that again? You prove who you love by what you do. If you love God, you'll keep his commandments at any cost. If you love your neighbour, you'll be good to them at any cost. And this man went away sorrowful. He knew it was right. I hope he repented later and was in the upper room. I don't know. But he went away he wasn't angry. He didn't say, why has Jesus told me to do that? He wanted to pay the price, but he loved himself so much that he couldn't give anything away. Is that not self-love? If he'd have loved his neighbour, that was the question. Love your neighbour as yourself. Conclusion. This is to do with Christian perfection. This is not don't kill, don't commit adultery, don't murder. Goodness me, there's atheists who keep those commandments. We're now talking about perfection. Matthew 5. What's perfection? Let's go back. Let's do some homework. Or not homework. Let's go back and refresh ourselves. Matthew chapter 5, verse 43. You've heard it said, love your neighbour, hate your enemy. That's not in the law. They thought it was, but it's not. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those that curse you. Do good to those that hate you. And pray for those which despitefully use you. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. Why? That you may be children of your Father in heaven, that you may become mature and perfect like him. For he makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good. Wow, no discrimination there. Do you treat people the same? Do you treat Christians the same as you treat the non-Christians? Jesus does. God does. And he sendeth, he makes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and he sendeth his rain on the just and the unjust. Do you treat people the same? Are you indiscriminate in your love? Or do you only love those that love you? This is perfection. If you love those which love you, what reward do you have? None. Even the publicans do the same. Sinners can do the same. Look after me, I'll look after you. Do a good turn and you owe me one. And if you salute your brethren only, what do you more than others? Do not even the publicans do that? You therefore be perfect, be mature, be like God, even as your Father which is in heaven is perfect. And the perfection is talking about the maturity where you don't discriminate between your friend and your enemy, where you do unto others as you'd like them to do to you, where you love your neighbour as much as you love yourself, and that's a jolly lot. So, I've finished the study. We'll go on to something else next week. So if you want your prayers answered, it's in the context of prayer, remember. This is a way to get your prayers answered, to be like God. If you want your prayers answered and good gifts from God, we must be indiscriminate in our loving. This is Christian perfection, and the only proof you're God's children. You can tell me you're saved till you're blue in the face, but I'm going to watch your life. If I can't see Christ in your life, how do I know you've got Christ in your life? We've read it, but I'm going to read James again as a parting shot to you. And it's James chapter 2. We've looked at it already. If you fulfill the royal law, this is the kingly way, this is the royal way. If you fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbour as yourself. Love people as much as you love yourself. Do unto others as you'd like to do unto you. But if ye have respect, can you see again? Perfection is to not have respect. God sends the rain on the just and the unjust, and he sends the sun on the righteous and on the unrighteous. So to be like Christ is to be indiscriminate in your loving. If you have respect to persons, you commit sin and are convinced of the law as transgressors. I'll leave that with you. I found that a challenging study. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you. It's only what's in the law and the prophets. The Bible's full of it. God bless you. Let me pray for you. Lord, please help us. I know I fail in this, Lord. I know the selfishness in me, Lord. I don't treat people as I treat myself. I don't love people as I love myself. And I want to change, Lord. I know I've changed over the years, but I want to change more. I want this word to challenge me to go into my heart and lodge there, so that as I meet situations, I can practice what I preach. And help everyone who's watching this video. I pray they'll be challenged to not talk Christianity, but to live it. Help us, Father. Give us the grace to do what you ask us to do. I ask it in your name. Amen. God bless you. Thanks for listening. I hope you'll tune in to the next study.